Hey everybody, it's Dr. May. Today is Veterans Day, so for all you veterans out there, thank you for your service, and for everyone else, welcome. So today we're going to talk about making sense of emotions. So in essence, this video is going to help us understand why we favor certain emotions and tend to feel them more, and why we don't feel other emotions as much, and how we can broaden our emotional repertoire. Of course, using sensory motor techniques such as using our body to help support other emotions that we're not used to feeling. Okay, so here we go. Making sense of emotions. I think we all could use a little bit more of that, right? All right. So how do we first make sense of emotions? So let's put it together with emotions and the body, right? Because obviously sensory motor psychotherapy, we need to examine how the body plays a role and then use the body to help us improve the situation, okay? So we'll start with the left of this flow chart here. So as usual, our patterns of emotion are learned in childhood, right? There's certain emotions that are reinforced and supported by our families of origin, and there's other emotions that are not. And then our bodies support certain emotions and inhibit other emotions. Okay, so that leads us to the middle part. So there's a relationship between the emotions and the body sensations and movements, and they both influence each other, and you can't have one without the other, right? You can't feel an emotion without also having impact, oh, whoopsies, in your body and in your movement or your urge to move, okay? And those then support the kind of beliefs and meanings we develop, okay? And it influences the way we then respond behaviorally. So they all kind of go together, all right? Now, another thing, the emotions, the body, and communication. All right, so look at the center column. So those are examples of 3 different emotions. And then on the left side and the right side are the way those emotions can be conveyed or experienced rather in our bodies and witnessed by others through our body language. Okay, so let's say we're looking at the emotion of embarrassment. Okay, so when we feel tightness in the chest, blood rushing to the face, kind of like when you blush when you're embarrassed, we experience those physical sensations, and it helps to communicate to us, oh yeah, I'm feeling kind of embarrassed. Okay, and the embarrassment also leads to those, those physical sensations. Okay, so when we look at social signaling, okay, as we say in RODBT, other people will see in us things such as a downward head movement, like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed, I touch my face, I might blush, I might avoid looking at somebody because I feel funny about it. So those body movements and gestures and stuff are things that help give other people a clue physically that I'm feeling embarrassed, right? So the body and the emotions work together and they communicate to ourselves and other people. All right, let's look at the example of anger. Okay, so when I'm angry, I get the clue that I'm feeling angry because I might have tension in my jaw, right? I'm real mad. I'm like a dog baring my teeth. I might feel my heart racing. My breathing gets a little fast. My chest feels tight. My hands might get into fists. So things like that might give me the clue that I'm feeling angry. What other people might see in me physically, they might see that I'm yelling, my voice is getting raised. Maybe I'm staring in an intense, provocative, intimidating way. Maybe my face is getting red. I might have repetitive, sharp gestures like, what are you doing? Right? So those movements and those body signals communicate to others that I'm angry. Okay. Last one, grief and sadness might give me the clue that I'm feeling sad because I have a heaviness in my chest. My breath gets more shallow. I'm tired. I'm not hungry. I feel like sleeping, right? Sluggish, makes me feel sad. Other people might see my head's down, I'm crying, I have a collapsed posture, such as in that picture there. All right. So overall, as you can see, emotions communicate to ourselves and to other people. And there's an interrelationship between our emotions, body sensations, and movements. Okay. All right. So here's a diagram I'm going to use throughout just to help illustrate a point about core emotions and pattern emotions. Okay. So core emotions are the original raw emotions that we experience in a situation. And then sometimes because of the way we were raised or what things we're allowed to feel or not feel, we develop other emotions on top of it that cover up the true deeper emotion. Okay, so sort of like the core of an apple is like the real deeper original thing. And then the flesh of the apple, the fruit of the apple is around it. And it's what people tend to see more. It's what we tend to experience more because it's perhaps more acceptable, or it was more acceptable, or was more adaptive in some way. Okay, so we're going to get more into this detail here. Okay, here's another diagram that might help you kind of understand the point, right? So you might have seen something like this before, like they call it the anger iceberg. Okay, so the pattern emotion, the emotion that I tend to experience more and that other people tend to see, might be anger. But below that, the core emotion, the thing that's the original feeling that might be harder to feel, might be things such as vulnerable things like being nervous, feeling hurt, feeling sad, feeling frustrated, feeling traumatized, lonely, but those might be too vulnerable for me to feel. Or maybe when I grew up, it wasn't acceptable to feel those things. So that's the core, but I might cover it over with anger because anger was more acceptable. So it was more acceptable to others, and therefore now it's more acceptable to me. Okay, so that's kind of another way to see the core versus the pattern, right? Other times people say things such as the primary emotions, the secondary emotions, all right? But in sensory motor psychotherapy, this is the languaging that they happen to use. So I'm going to go with that here, all right? Okay, so here's the origin of some of the core emotions. So let's look at these little babies here. So babies are like unfiltered, right? They just express whatever it is they're expressing without really thinking much about it, right? They just have pure, raw, intense emotions, happiness, joy, anger, anxiety, fear, whatever it is, right? So they're authentic, they're true to the moment, they're not inhibited in any way. Okay, so you have unrestrained core emotions, all right? All right, but as we grow up, not every emotion we experience is considered acceptable by our caregivers, by our family of origin, by other people in our life. So we learn to inhibit some emotions and then express other ones. So let's look at the picture I put together here. So let's say on the left, there's a little boy who's crying, and his mother doesn't like that because boys aren't supposed to cry. And so she yells at him for crying. So this happens repeatedly. And he starts to learn that vulnerable emotions aren't acceptable for me. So I'm trying to do what I can to survive in this relationship with my mother and not get criticized and invalidated. So I'm going to try to block feelings like being disappointed or embarrassed, scared, hurt, or the act of crying, which might reflect sadness. Okay, so I might armor myself up physically to prevent those emotions from happening, or talk myself out of it, or block them in some way. But I might be okay with other things, such as maybe being happy, maybe being physically sick is okay, but not emotionally hurt. Maybe being cool is good, or angry is good because boys could be angry. Maybe I could be surprised, annoyed, and loved, but all the other things are no good. All right, just an example. All right, I'm not, it could be different patterns, obviously. All right, so as it says in the bottom, when our attachment figures, such as our parents, disapprove of a certain emotion, we start to believe that that emotion must be bad. Oh my God, I'm crying, I'm sad. That can't be good. No, that's not an acceptable emotion to feel. So I start to develop physical habits like armoring, like in that picture there, to help block the emotion. All right. So when I have a stiff upper lip, it's harder for me to feel sad because I'm blocking that vulnerable feeling of sadness. Get it? So as they arise, I automatically develop this pattern of armoring against them. Okay. And then sometimes, just to point out, emotions in general may not be acceptable in certain families. It's just a very unemotional environment, and any expression of emotion, even joy, might be something you learn to inhibit because that's just how your family is. All right. So we're just going to put that out there. Okay. So a little bit more about pattern emotions. So like I said before, when our caregivers don't respond appropriately to our core emotions by validating them and allowing them to be acceptable, we block them and develop another emotion instead. Okay. So they could be considered like a relational defense. So it helps me survive in a relationship. It helps me keep the caregiver around, keep their approval, keep them loving me and caring for me. All right. So that's why they call it a relational defense. So this is a little bit different than an animal defense, such as fight, flight, cry for help, freeze, and shut down, okay, which we talked about earlier on in other videos. All right. So the relational defense, the other alternate, more acceptable emotion, helps to override, alter, or mask our true emotion, right? So if we look at the picture, maybe the girl feels sad or uncomfortable or awkward, but she's going to try to block that and put on a happy face, okay? So pattern emotions could revolve two things, though. Well, I'm kind of focusing right now on how we can block our emotions, which is like an overregulating strategy. Sometimes we also use an underregulating strategy. All right, so get to that in a moment. All right, so we're going to start with overregulating because that's kind of what I was talking about already. So look at the pictures of these people. So it could be possible, I mean, I don't know what's actually going on in these pictures, I found them on the internet, that they're feeling something, but masking them by constricting their facial expression and possibly even their body movement. I'm not completely sure what's going on, right? So they might look like they're kind of neutral or okay, but maybe behind the scenes, they're actually suffering. Maybe they're angry, but they're not allowed to be angry because expressing it's going to be a problem. Or maybe they're scared, or they're frustrated, or they're ashamed, but that's not acceptable. So they're trying to block it by putting on a masked neutral face, okay? So let's see if some situations where this could have developed. So if caregivers ignored or reacted negatively to our emotions, we might dismiss signals of internal distress and minimize our emotional needs, right? So if I feel on the inside that I'm really anxious and uncomfortable, I might try to block that internal experience, right? Or if my need is telling me like, oh, geez, I'm really afraid I need to get out of here, and that's going to make me feel safe, I might have to block that because maybe it's just not acceptable, all right? Next, if we lost hope that our emotions will elicit comfort and empathy, we may fail to communicate emotions or even experience them. So like that little boy in the other picture who was crying and his mother was yelling at him, if he starts to realize that if I cry and I'm upset, my mother's not going to comfort me, I may stop communicating to people that I'm upset because I don't believe that they're really going to help me, that they're really going to comfort me and empathize with me and validate me. So I just, may try not to communicate it, or I might try not to experience it at all. All right. Can you guys relate? Perhaps, right? All right. So as you probably can guess, overregulating strategies have some downsides. So if I block even those certain emotions that are not acceptable, sometimes I end up accidentally blocking all my emotions, right? So even though maybe it's more acceptable to feel joy, maybe I don't even allow myself to feel that just because I'm so armored up all the time, okay? So it limits my emotional experience, array, and expression. And it reduces my capacity, my ability to even feel positive and negative emotions. So I'm kind of like in an emotional desert. And I might feel kind of like numb or blah or, empty inside because I'm using too many overregulating strategies, right? I have a lack of vitality because emotions give us a sense of vitality and liveliness. Another thing is that I might have trouble coping with and resolving my core emotions. So if I overregulate my core emotion of sadness, because let's say this person feels sad in the picture here, I may never resolve like certain grief that I have because I'm not allowed to feel it. Like you can't heal what you can't feel. Ever hear that expression? So if I don't allow myself to feel it, how am I going to heal it? Right? If I keep blocking the vulnerability, the shame, the anxiety, the fears, I'm never really going to work them through. So I have to relate to those emotions differently and allow the core emotions to be present, which we're going to talk about later. And another thing, interpersonally, I might have difficulty connecting with others on a deep level. So look at that picture. It looks like a guy looking at a picture of a bunch of people having fun, but he's not with them, right? He feels like an outsider, perhaps. Like maybe that's just a symbol for his life. Like other people feel like they're happy, they're connected, they're feeling things with each other, but he just doesn't feel much of anything. And so you have to feel something in order to feel connected with people. Otherwise, you're going to feel kind of alienated and isolated. And that's not a great thing to experience either. Like you might feel really bad about that, right? Okay, now we're going to flip to under-regulating strategies. Okay, so these are kind of familiar if you know about anxious ambivalent attachment styles, and I have a video on that if you want to learn more about it. This is sometimes reinforced there. Okay, so this kind of patterning you can see in those kind of relationships, and it's related to the signaling, the signal cry, like the cry for help, animal defense that we talked about in earlier videos, which is a hyperarousal type of animal defense. Okay, so how does this happen? So if our caregivers were undependable and unpredictable, we might have learned that the only way to get a consistent response from them or get them to finally pay attention for us was to escalate our emotions. So if I express a medium level of emotion, they may not really pay attention to me. But if I really show high levels of distress, then they finally come around and show me comfort. So they kind of reinforce my patterning of escalating my emotions in order to get what I need, which might be comfort, which might be help, which might be, assistance or something, okay? So we can elicit needed attention and comfort only through being upset. When we could only be upset to get comfort, we learn to underregulate our emotions. So I learn to make them bigger, and I get more used to making them bigger because that's how the relationship pattern was, okay? But clearly, as you can imagine, because this is like, it reminds me of the way biosocial theory talks about borderline personality disorder, okay? So that sometimes, we bounce between overregulating and underregulating our emotions because we're getting our regular expressions of emotions, our core emotions are being invalidated. So if this sounds familiar to you, it sounds familiar to me too, but this is the way sensory motor psychotherapy explains it. All right, so the downside. So it's going to keep you experiencing these underregulated emotional states. And when you're really emotional all the time, it really can create havoc in your life. It can create havoc in your sense of self, your behaviors, your relationships, your social life, the way you are at work. And you're at the mercy of your emotional intensity. So your emotions are driving the bus. You're more in emotional mind. You're acting based on your emotions, okay? And so that could be problematic. And then you might end up in DBT or something like that, right? Most likely. Okay, so emotional biases in the body. So when certain emotions are reinforced and other emotions are not, you develop a bias towards some emotions. They become your favorite emotions, and you tend to experience the acceptable ones more and the unacceptable ones less, okay? So, and our body reinforced that as well, okay? So procedural patterns and physical habits support certain emotions and keep others at bay, okay? And even we tend to orient towards certain things that reinforce the emotions that we tend to experience. So we might look for certain things in our environment or tend to certain clues that reinforce things such as anger, such as sadness, such as unworthiness, anxiety, and it kind of puts the whole picture together. All right, so let's look at the examples. I think it's going to be easier to explain with the examples. So let's look at the bottom left. So if I have tendencies to have the physical pattern of chronic tension around my eyes and jaw and shoulders or chest, right? Like the woman in the picture, okay? It might support angry feelings more, but it might make it harder for me to feel things such as sadness, grief, or vulnerable feelings, right? So if I'm in the posture of anger, it's hard for me to feel other things, okay? So I have to look at myself and kind of check in and say, am I in the posture of anger? Is that preventing me from having a fuller range of emotions, all right? On the other hand, let's say I am more used to experiencing vulnerable emotions, okay? Because that's what was reinforced in my family. It was okay to be weak. It was okay to be in a one-down position. That drew comfort to me, perhaps, okay? People paid attention to me when I looked like I was suffering. So that was something that I developed a body habit of, having perhaps a sunken chest, a downward head, deep sighs that support grief and hurt. But when I'm in that posture, it's very hard for me to feel other more strong emotions, such as anger, right? So it's very hard for me to feel assertive and confident and anything else if I'm in a posture like that, okay? So I have to be able to give myself a physical loosening up variety so I can have an ability to feel more things. Okay, so reclaiming core emotions. So how do we get back to experiencing the kind of emotions that we had to cut off to survive in our earlier life? All right, so first, we have to observe our emotional patterns and our physical patterns with curiosity, all right? We're not trying to judge ourselves or make something wrong. We're just trying to open our awareness to what's actually going on, okay? Gee, I wonder why I'm feeling anger so much more. Or gee, I wonder why I keep going back to shame no matter what happens, okay? And then think about, what were some of the family patterns that led to this? And acknowledge and validate how this made sense, how this was adaptive for me, how this helped me fit into my family of origin and get a better response from my caregivers, okay? So I could understand that this is a reason why I developed certain emotional patterns, okay? And I could be sad about the fact that when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to cry. I wasn't allowed to feel certain things. And that is sad, right? Because my life might have been better if I experienced a full rainbow of emotions, such as the person on the left holding the big rainbow, right? We want to feel the full spectrum, rainbow spectrum of our emotions. Okay, so that's a bit of a process that we could start with here. Then what we can start to do is think of what, like a sliver of memory, like a small snapshot of a time from our past where we did start to feel a core emotion. And then try to stay with that, that sliver, try to animate it and make it real in our mind so we could start to fully experience and embody it now. Okay, so let's say I'm the little boy in the original picture who was yelled at by his mother for crying. And so afterwards, he started to armor himself over against vulnerable feelings. So let's say he thinks about that time when he was crying and his mother did criticize him. Okay, what was that trigger that made me cry? All right, maybe I fell down and I scraped my knee. Okay, so let me really think about that time and how upset I was and how scared I was and get myself back there. So my building blocks are reanimated about that event. Okay, so how am I thinking? How am I feeling? What's my body doing in that core emotion of feeling frightened or sad? Okay, so then I could try to get my body to get into the physical expressions, postures, and movements of that original core emotion, which might have been something like fear or sadness or shame or whatever it happened to be. And then when I practice getting into the physicality of those core emotions, it allows more space for them to happen. Okay. All right, but don't worry, there's going to be more exercises later. Okay, so as I said before, patterned emotions could sometimes interfere with our relationships, or if we arm ourselves against emotions by overregulating, it prevents us from connecting with people in the ways we want to sometimes, okay? So let's say on the left, we're talking about patterned emotions in a relationship. So if I'm stuck in limited pattern emotions, it keeps me stuck in certain relationship patterns. So if I'm frequently angry and I bring my anger into my relationships, that creates a certain pattern between me and the other person. Maybe there's frequent arguments with my spouse or my children, okay? Or let's say I'm always in a emotional one down position and I'm always shamed and I'm always scared and I'm always apologetic and that kind of thing. That creates a certain pattern between me and other people. And being in those two different ways attracts certain kind of people into my life. Like when I'm a really angry person, there's certain types of people that are going to be okay with that and have a relationship with me. When I'm really a shameful, down, one down, vulnerable, overly apologetic person, that attracts a certain type of person into my life. Okay. And those patterns might not be really healthy for me at times. Okay. Especially if they're very frequent and I don't have the full range of other emotions as well. Okay. So if I could reclaim my core emotions and have that broader emotional repertoire and be more okay with myself, which is associated with secure attachments and healthy relationships, it helps me to have more possibilities in my relationships with others and maybe relate to people in new and adaptive ways. So if there's a conflict, I may not have to respond by, blasting somebody verbally and, chewing them out and getting really nasty about it. I might be able to be more empathetic, for example. Or if there's a conflict, instead of overly apologizing and getting really shameful and crying and saying, I'm sorry, it was all my fault. Maybe now I could handle it in a different way. And that's going to improve my relationship. Okay, so see how that goes. The more repertoire you have, the better kind of adaptivity you have in current relationships, and the more possibilities you have for relating to healthier people. So if you're healthier because you have a broader range of emotions and more flexibility in how you experience them, you're going to attract similar people into your life and have an opportunity to have healthier relationships. Okay. All right, so we're at the exercises. So here's some things you can try to help increase your emotional repertoire and, learn some more about how to apply these skills to yourself. Okay, so first, this one's called Emotions, Expressions, and the Body. So as you can see on top, I put together a series of people making different faces associated with different emotions, including joy, disgust, fear, sadness, surprise, shame, and anger. Okay, so those are some core emotional experiences that we would like to have the ability to experience if possible. So one way to make the emotions start to animate within us is to make the facial expression associated with that emotion. So what I want you to do is to stand up so that your posture is less of an issue if you're sitting or curled up or laying down, and try to mimic the face for each emotion one at a time. Okay, so if I'm joyful, I'll try to create a face of joy. And then when I do that and I hold it for a little while, I start to feel the joy that goes with it, right? Or if I make a disgust face, I start to feel the disgust that goes with it. It's interesting the way it works, but it actually does kind of happen, okay? So make the faces and then describe the changes in your body or movements or that go along with it. And it might be just movements you want to make. I mean, you might not actually move, but you might, see what happens, okay? And then as you're doing that, move on to any thoughts or memories that come up. Okay, so while you're making that face and you're experiencing that feeling, it might link you to certain thoughts about different things, okay? Past or present. Okay, now I know that this emotion wheel is very small. Even on my laptop, it's very small. And I bet if you're watching this on your cell phone, it's even smaller and impossible to read. So the idea is find an emotion wheel. All you have to do is do a Google search and type in emotion wheel, and a bunch of examples come up. And you could print them out for yourself or look at it big or like zoom in on it. Okay, so don't worry if you can't read this here. But the idea is that a lot of different emotions are listed, and it'd be helpful to look through it and see which emotions feel most familiar to you. Like which of the emotions you tend to feel more, that you're more comfortable feeling, and which of the emotions are ones that you barely feel at all, or like you don't really have a lot of experience feeling because perhaps, they're just blocked or things that you just don't get to. All right. Well, one thing you could even do is if you print it out, get like a highlighter and maybe just highlight the familiar ones. And so you can see the contrast between the familiar and unfamiliar. And if you look in the center of the wheel, there's some key emotions there. And then they branch out into other like shades of that emotion. So feeling fearful, might be the core, but then from there, you could feel things like scared, anxious, insecure, weak, etc. Right? So, like just kind of go through it, and it kind of gives you some insight about yourself and your emotional experiences. So in the end, they say, just for the sake of an exercise, all right, pick 3 familiar and 3 unfamiliar emotions that we're going to try to use. Okay. Next. Okay. So after you pick those 3 and 3, how does your body reflect or express each familiar emotion? So when I'm feeling that thing that I'm used to feeling, what happens in my body? Okay. And when I think about the 3 emotions that I don't usually feel, how do I think my body contributes to holding them back? Okay. One thing that could help here is going back to the earlier lesson where we did the emotion vocabulary. Sensation vocabulary. So I'm talking about emotions, they got the wrong word. Sensation vocabulary. So it helps you put more words to your body sensations, and that could help in this situation. All right. Do negative beliefs participate in suppressing unfamiliar emotions? Okay, so let's say I was raised in a family where girls weren't allowed to be angry. Everyone had to keep their negative feelings to themselves, and if you were angry, that was no good. So maybe I developed the belief that anger is not okay. Keep it to yourself. Because maybe someone told me that, repeatedly. All right. So I might still have that little thought in the back of my mind, and that's contributing to me holding back my emotions with my body. Okay. Next, describe the relationship between the emotions you find familiar or unfamiliar and your family dynamics when you were a child. Okay. So which emotions were accepted or expressed in your family? You know, if you think about your family experiences, was there a lot of anger flying around all the time? Or, you know, were people sad and depressed all the time? Was your mom curled up in bed half the day because she was depressed and couldn't get up? You know, what was the emotional tone of the family? So what emotions were expressed, what were unexpressed? And were you invalidated for showing some emotions? Okay, so again, such as the picture of the boy crying at his mother, criticizing him, he was invalidated for perhaps feeling sad or fearful, all right, or shamed. Okay, so then choose one of the unfamiliar emotions that you want to experience more, and just imagine that it's acceptable to others. Okay, so let's say it really wasn't acceptable for me to feel sadness, but what if I were just to pretend for a minute that it was okay? You know, what if I imagined people being okay with me being sad and they were supportive when I was sad? How does that then affect the way, you know, having my posture? How does it affect the way I feel in my body? Just imagining that it is acceptable. Okay. All right. So here's another exercise for us here. Emotions and early attachment, right? So about our relationship with our early caregivers. So we're going to start with usually high arousal emotions, okay? Not hyper arousal, but high arousal. So these could include things such as grief or distress, frustration, exasperation, anxiety, fear, worry, embarrassment, anger, hostility, or outrage, okay? So think about these emotions, right? And which one of these might have been familiar, common, or accepted in your family when you were growing up, okay? Describe how these emotions were expressed in your family. So when you think about people who were experiencing the emotions that you remember, how did they experience them? You know, were they very overt about that? Were they loud? What did they slam doors? Would they curl up in bed all day? What did they do? Well, maybe not curl up in bed for high arousal emotions, but, you know, how did they express them? Were they dysregulated about them, or were they hidden or held in? Okay. All right. Choose two of the high arousal emotions you noted. Describe how you experience each one in your body and how you express them when they come up, right? So are you overt in your expression? Do you reach out to somebody and talk about it? Do you do some kind of, you know, activity around it? You know, if you're feeling grief or distress, do you cry? You know, if you're frustrated, you pound your desk with your fist. You know, what do you actually do? And now, talking about our resources, we talked about resources in the earlier part of sensory motor psychotherapy. How could you draw on somatic resources, so resources using your body, to relate to your high arousal emotions differently? Okay, so if I'm usually very frustrated or exasperated and I start pounding my fists or I start chewing people out on the phone, maybe I can relate to it differently if I change my body in such a way that my emotions start to get more regulated into my window of tolerance. Okay, so just a quick reminder, here are some somatic resources we could draw upon. So using our breath, right? So that could help us calm down into our window of tolerance, kind of relax a little bit more. Connecting with your back, so pressing your back against something so that you feel a little more secure back there. Pushing your feet into the floor so you feel more grounded. You could at the same time also align your spine or tighten your TVA, which is that muscle that kind of wraps around your abdomen and your back, and kind of gaining a little strength that way, a little lift. All right. You could self-soothe by hugging yourself or rocking yourself. That might make your emotions a little calmer. Use containment resources such as wrapping yourself in a blanket, putting your hand on your heart and your belly to kind of center yourself. Okay, so things like that could be somatic resources you could use to regulate your high arousal emotions and relate to them in a different way than maybe you're used to. Maybe you developed a habit of doing certain things and it helps you change a habit by putting something new in place. Okay, so now we're going to flip to usually low arousal emotions. So it's not quite hypoarousal. You're still in your window of tolerance, but they're low arousal. So those could include things such as sadness, depression, melancholy, boredom, being bummed out, discouragement, disappointment, defeat, shame, hopelessness. Okay. So which of these, usually low arousal emotions, were familiar, common, or accepted in your family when you were a child? Okay, so try to think about that, reflect upon earlier experiences in your family. So if they were acceptable, how were they expressed? Were they expressed openly, or were they kind of hidden and held in? So choose two of the low arousal emotions you noted, and describe how you feel each one in your body, and how do you express them when they come up? So do you tend to do the same as your family? Were you open about them, or you tend to keep them to yourself and hide them? And also, just like the last one, how can you use your somatic resources to relate to your high arousal emotions differently? Perhaps increase your arousal a little bit so they're not as low, and that could help bring you back to the window of tolerance comfort zone. So you could use these again, all right? Maybe different ones than you used the other time. All right. Okay, so next, emotions, beliefs, and the body. So this is talking about what they call a feedback loop, okay? So see how this, I put a picture of a downward spiral here. It's kind of like that. So imagine like this circle here with emotions, thoughts, body sensations, and movements being on top of that spiral, kind of like spiraling down like this. So it basically means that each piece of that loop there, they feed off of each other, each component of that loop. So when I feel certain emotions, it triggers certain thoughts. And when I feel those thoughts, it affects my body sensations and my movements. And those can make my emotions even more intense. And it can make my thoughts even more extreme. And it can make my body even more aroused. And it goes around and around the circle, okay? And we kind of like rev ourselves up to feel a certain thing and intensifies the emotional experience. So here's an example that's provided in the textbook, okay, about loneliness. So let's say I'm starting out with the feeling of I feel lonely. Then I have the thought of I will never have a partner. Then as I think that, my posture starts to collapse. Then I feel lonelier and sadder, right? Because that posture is supporting the feelings of being lonely and sad. Then I start to think I'll always be alone. My future is dim. Oh, now my body sags more and my head drops. And I feel lonely, sad, disappointed, and hopeless, like it's getting worse. And then I think, no one in the world is going to be there for me. There must be something wrong with me, right? So the thoughts are getting more extreme. And now my body sensations are more extreme. I want to curl up in a ball and hide from the world. See how that goes? Like we kind of get ourselves all worked up, in this downward spiral of experience. So think about an example for you. How do you do that with yourself, right? It's important just to be aware of our patterns. How do we make an emotion and all the thoughts and the body experiences with it more intense than they have to be, right? How do we keep bringing ourselves down that spiral? Sometimes maybe if we're too alone and there's too little going on, we get too much in our head and we kind of go through this more and more and more, all right? Okay, next, embodying an unfamiliar emotion, right? So this is going back to that idea that the core emotions might be unfamiliar to us, and there's a possibility of us bringing them back into our repertoire of experience instead of covering them over with the more familiar patterned emotions, okay? So here's an example. So let's say the unfamiliar core emotion that I want to embody is sadness. So maybe I tend to block sadness. So instead of feeling sadness, the pattern emotion that's more acceptable to me or familiar to me might be anger, right? So when I'm sad about something, I might flip it around and turn angry, okay? So now think back to your childhood and identify 3 situations with an attachment figure, such as parent, caregiver, in which the core emotion you want to reclaim was not accepted. Okay, so again, I brought back the picture of the boy being sad and the mother yelling at him because sadness was not accepted. So choose a sliver of memory from one of those memories to explore. So just a piece of it, just that moment where it really stands out to you that this emotion was not accepted. So what happened during that sliver? So was it a look that you were given? Was it something somebody said? Was it you were smacked around for feeling a certain way? What happened? What happened, right? So let's say the parent yelled at me for crying or gave me a negative look. And that's the thing that really stands out in your mind. So take the time to embody the state you were in when this sliver of memory occurred and note what happens to your building blocks. So when you were invalidated like that, how does that impact your emotions, thoughts, movements, and body sensations. For example, I'm feeling sad, but I'm trying not to. I'm thinking I can't be sad, I must be strong. My body sensations, trying to be strong, is tightness and shallow breathing, right? Trying to hold back the sadness, hold back the tears. Movements, maybe a desire to pull away from others. So I can't be vulnerable and seek comfort from my sadness. Maybe I have to like pull away and be alone because that's safer. Okay, so whatever it happens to be for you, try to embody your building blocks and note these things. Okay, next, identify the physical patterns that then prevent you from feeling the emotion. Okay, so now I'm trying to prevent myself from feeling sad. I'm remembering being invalidated from being sad. So maybe I notice things such as tension in my shoulders, or my heart feels hard, or I don't exhale fully, my breath is shallow, right? Things like that perhaps prevent me from feeling that unacceptable emotion. So now what could I do? Could I explore inhibiting those patterns so I can embody the emotion? So instead of blocking myself from sadness with all this tightness, this over-controlled strategy, overregulating strategy rather, maybe I could just start to loosen that up, right? Maybe I could take a deeper breath. Maybe I could like relax a little bit and make room for that core emotion of sadness that I had been used to blocking. So I'm trying to undo that automatic habit of getting a twinge of sadness and automatically protecting myself from it. Okay. So number 8, this is a good question. I like this one. Identify anything you need to know in order to experience the unfamiliar emotion. So let's say I need to know that now in my life, in my current circumstances, it is different from how I grew up. And it is okay to feel sad. Maybe I have a partner now that would be okay seeing me sad. Or maybe I'm with some friends that are supportive of me and they would be fine if I was sad. Maybe they would be glad to comfort me if I was sad, right? Maybe I just need to really internalize and know these things better, okay? So I should practice mindfully saying those words to myself to try to reassure myself of these things, all right? And then think of how you might challenge any beliefs that keep the unfamiliar emotion at bay. So it's kind of similar to number 8. So, but maybe I'm challenging it by saying like, I watched my friend comfort another friend when she was sad. So I could see that she probably is okay with people feeling sad. So maybe if I was sad, she probably would also comfort me and, be accepting. So that's a way to challenge this idea that nobody would accept me or people would automatically reject me if I express my sadness. And then, of course, find a somatic resource you could use to help reclaim that emotion. So maybe I need to like take a deeper breath, right? And that's going to help relax things. Maybe I could lighten up, and open my chest and, or just allow myself to loosen up to feel the vulnerability, right? Maybe there's some physical thing I can do to make myself feel sad. Or maybe I could comfort myself by putting my hand to my heart and my belly, and it makes me feel safer to experience the sadness. All right, so you can play with some of those things. Oh, and that's it. There's so many exercises. I kind of forgot what the last one was. All right, so I hope this has been helpful for you guys and gives you an opportunity to feel a little bit more than you felt in the past. All right, so thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.